So the comic that I'm choosing to analyze is just Alan Moore and David Gibbons' Watchmen. And the part that I'm analyzing is a really short part right in the beginning of the comic. It's basically centered around these two detectives, and they're investigating the death of a man. Starts out with these guys down at the bottom talking about communism and cleaning up the blood, but that's not as important as this part up here. So these two detectives, they're talking about how this man died, and they're trying to figure it out. And so basically, they came to the conclusion that the man was either thrown or jumped out of a window, and he basically fell several stories to the ground below. And one thing that I like about this is, so McLeod basically discusses a few different transition types, and some of them I feel were more powerful than others. And initially, basically, so I'm looking at this part right here. So I initially thought the transition, that what was being used was subject to subject. Um, but I think that scene to scene actually felt more correct in defining that transition. And if you didn't know, the two transitions, the definitions are basically as follows. So subject to subject transition, it changes the subject whilst staying within the same scene or idea. And a scene to scene transition transports the reader across significant distances of time. So I didn't think it was subject to subject because even though the subject does kind of change in what you think about as the guy who died and the detectives, I still think the overarching subject is still just the investigation and this happening right here, him dying. Um, and with that, there is a significant change in time, and you know that because this happened a little while earlier, and this is now. But what it lacks out of the definition of scene to scene is there isn't a jump in space because it's taking place in this guy's apartment or wherever he was living. And if we just disregard that though and take that out of the definition, I do believe that scene to scene is correct. And I'll just show you right here. So basically, it starts out where they're talking about what they think happened, and then it's cut straight to the scene of the original crime of how he died, and then it goes back to them talking, and then him being fought, and basically all these red slides, these red images, are the past, and it keeps cutting back to the investigation and then the original crime happening. And it sort of helps you understand the thought process of these investigators as they're thinking about it and also see it happening in real time. And Moore and Gibbons probably did, they chose to do that transition for a lot of reasons, but I do think one of the main reasons why they did that was just to keep the plot fluid, because they could have easily split these two things up. So, shown the detectives talking and then shown the actual event happening beforehand, or however they chose to. Um, but they didn't. They didn't make them their own separate entities, and that wouldn't be appealing on the eye, and it would require the reader to basically to keep referring back to the previous scene. And although you could do that, someone may lose interest, and it's a lot easier and it's a lot more interesting to do it this way. And by using these transitions, the reader is able to read the dialogue, because the dialogue is present time throughout all of these pictures, um, while at the same time they can see the original crime being investigated. And like I said earlier, that does allow the reader to feel like they're more a part of the comic and feel more invested in reading it. And that, like I said, that really, really small detail just of these transitions about this comic, it really does set the tone to allow the reader to feel engulfed in it. And I didn't really read too many pages past this, but I already felt like I was a part of it. And I do think that they did a really, really good job of using that transition, and no one would have thought otherwise unless you knew to look for it.